Hello, everybody. Once again, I'm Liam Crafton Jr., aka Zorval Chan Less Than Guru, and you might see his ear right here. Mars, the video cat. Say hello, Mars, who's going to be popping in and out of the video as depending on how annoying he wishes to be. Yes, you annoying cat, but I love you. Okay, so today is part 3 for my Palladium First Edition Deep Dive Rewrite, or Palladium First Edition Rewrite Deep Dive, however you want to arrange those words. So basically, we've talked about attributes, species, occupations, how all of that worked in the previous 2 videos. This video, I'm going to stick with skills. I probably could smush skills and equipment, but I'm gonna do equipment with manufactured products and have that be the next uh, part of this many part, very long video series. But it is a very big deep dive into both Palladium First Edition and things that I've changed in it, the reasoning why, my thoughts, my logic behind it, how it benefits me, my group, my table, the system, in my view, and the purpose of the game, which is to have that nostalgia feel of an old school, at least 80s game. Maybe not quite 70s old school, but based off of AD&D. The Palladium First Edition was published in around, I believe, 1981. Actually, it's under my camera, so am probably not going to be. Oh, excuse me for adjusting the camera, but I needed to. I will want this for some visual aids, but this was published, I believe, originally. Oh, 90, or sorry, 83. So still very early 80s, based off of 90s D or 70s D&D. Wow, can't get my decades straight. Mars, now they're just going to see the back of your head. Get over here. Get over here, Mars. If you do this any longer, I'm going to have to start this video over. Yep. Okay. So, sorry about that. So, today is going to be focused on skills. And so you can see over here, skills, maybe. I don't know. Sometimes this records the um, cursor, sometimes it doesn't. I'm not sure why. I don't change any settings. I just come back and do it again. But skills on the right side of the page here. Electives and secondary skills, I kept those categories exactly the same as were originally presented in here. Um, but one of the things, I guess the most two drastic, I guess you could say, things that I did. One is I added conditions and modifiers to skills, which is something that I've for a very long time I've believed would help Palladium percentile based skills. And the other is I condensed a lot of skills, things that I saw as either redundant or 2 different skills that I didn't see the need for them to be 2 different skills. I kind of combined skills in a way. Those are kind of the 2 main things. The others was just more of organizational things. So the first thing I want to talk about is my modifiers. What do I mean by modifiers? And we can go all the way back. And I have these paper napkins just as bookmarks. But Rifter number 51, your guide to the Megaverse. So this is a published by Palladium Books, but it is normally they every once in a while will have true official material, but this is fan made material. You did get paid if you wrote for the Rifter, less than what you would as a freelance author, but it was paid work. If you could submit work if they liked it, thought that it would be good enough for other people to maybe enjoy, then they put it in here. And my contribution to this was my first published that wasn't self published. So even though it's not official, it's published by somebody else. Somebody else read my stuff, liked it. It was my first submission. So take that how you will. And it was based for Beyond the Supernatural. And my title is boring, but it is called Mundane Doesn't Mean Boring. And what I was trying to do is get off of a mindset that Beyond the Supernatural needed to have a monster of the week type thing, like a lot of TV series, and that you can bring real world type serial killers and stuff, and just using your paranormal abilities as being psychics or mystical users would be able to solve crimes and situations, and maybe even just lost puppies or whatever you were doing. And I brought in my background is anthropology, or one of my backgrounds is anthropology. So I brought in occupations of anthropology into it, as well as forensic science. At the time, I was not a forensic scientist. Now I am a forensic scientist, but my brother was at this time and currently still is. So I got a lot of information from him and wrote this, and it got published. And I was adding various things that I've always felt have been a little off in later Palladium games, or even more off, such as armor SDC and armor rating. Um, when you look at armor rating in this book, I have no problem with it. Armor rating makes sense with the bonuses that are given. But when you look at later games, which you can up your attributes a lot more, your bonuses raise a lot higher, but the armor rating does not change. So it's much easier to hit and not as much defense wise. So there are certain rules, that optional rules, that I incorporated into this writing about things like that. But we're talking about skills for Palladium. So here I just had skill modifiers. And I say, remember, some of these modifiers can be bonuses or negatives depending on the situation. And my best example is weather. If it's cloudy outside or rainy, it might be more difficult for you to make something, but it might be easier for you to sneak, things like that. So I gave in here weather and then tools. If you have really good tools, then maybe you should get a bonus to that percentile and add to it. Or if you don't have the tools for it and you're trying to improvise, like using a screwdriver for a hammer, something like that, where you actually, it's something that needs a tool, but you don't have the proper tool, but you have an improvised tool for it, then maybe that might allow you to at least have the chance to succeed, but maybe you'll have a modifier for that also. So I kind of go through that. And the other two things I've always thought about is stress and not stress. If you are in a stressful situation, like I am never going to not unlock my car if I have my keys in my hand. It's never going to happen to make somebody roll or whatever to do that. But as soon as I get put in a stressful situation, the zombies chasing me, then my hands are going to shake, and maybe I won't, either be able to press the button. I'll go to press it and the keys will fly out of my hand, or I'll drop them, or all the things that happen in movies that you're like, that's so stupid. But if you're in a stressful situation, that might be a problem. And even on something that's a 100% that's going to happen, maybe there are skills out there that you can do regularly, but every once in a while, maybe you'll slip, maybe you'll do something a little wrong. So the stress versus non-stress is something that I add, and basically it's also the same as, like, my example in here is tightrope walking. If you are if I stand on a board, I can't tightrope actually on a rope, but if I stand on a board that's that far, 4 to 6 inches off the ground, I'm going to be able to walk across it no problem. as soon as it's 40 feet in the air, even if there's no wind, even if there is the exact same board, the exact same physical structure of being solid and not going to break under me, psychologically, that is going to stress me out a lot, and I will have will not be as good. So certain things like that, is it stressful or is it not stressful? If it's non-stressful, then give a bonus to that. And then time also, if I'm in a rush and need to try to shorten my time, then maybe I'll get penalties. But maybe if I get to draw out the time, really think about it, really plan, then I'm going to add bonuses to that skill roll. And then I can maybe double the time, triple the time, quadruple the time. But there is a point where adding more time is just procrastination. It's not going to help. So I limited it to 4 times, quadruple the time. And then, so that is something that I wrote back in Rifter 51, which was probably early 2010s. It was 2010, July of 2010, right there. So that's when I wrote those rules, and I kind of modified them, and they were rules that I put in my game Dunamis, which was a percentile-based skill system, kind of like Palladium, but even combat was percentile-based, and that was published in 2006. So here, 2022, 12 years later, I'm using something I wrote for Beyond the Supernatural and bringing that into Palladium First Edition rewrite. So over here, you can see I talk about bonuses for time, extra time, bonuses for non-stressful situations, because I really believe in those. And then skill check modifiers for improvised tools, exceptional tools. Improvise is going to give you, I have it kind of backwards. I say plus 10% because you're adding it to the roll. So that's actually a penalty instead of adding it to your number that you're rolling under. But then something like exceptional tools will do the opposite. If you have really good tools that are exceptional, then you should get a bonus. So it's a -10 to the die roll. Why I do it that way is because when you roll a d20, you don't adjust armor rating based off of a strike or parry bonus. You roll your d20, you add it to that. So I'm seeing it like that. You add to your bonus, but you want to roll low instead of rolling high. And then the situation, how much, weather conditions. Instead of doing like light rain, this, that, basically, I try to just say, is this rain, is it a minor situation? Is it a medium or is it major? And a game master could determine and give the appropriate bonus or penalty to the roll based off of that. So I basically just wanted to say this skills modifiers is not something that I just quickly pulled out. It was something that I made in Dunamis for that percentile based game back in 2006. I did have it actually published, even if unofficially, in the Rifter 51 from 2010. And then that has translated over to 2022. So this is an idea that I really like, and it's been well received enough to be published. So then I basically just give an example of skill use. I am going more old school, and if you go really old school, there were no skills. Thieves might get like a D6% chance, or sorry, yeah, D6, and it's like if you roll a this to this, you succeed. If not, you fail. In Beckme and in some AD&D, you would have a percentage based, and that would gain levels. But all the other in AD&D and Beckme, Rule Cyclopedia, you really didn't have other skills out there. Palladium tacked on a skill system to the chassis of D&D. So one of the things old school though is if you're a ranger and you're just trying to navigate in the woods and you are from around that area, don't roll. There's no need to roll sense of direction. Just you do it. and I am trying to bring that and incorporate that into the campaign. Sometimes I'll look and say, hey, you're a this, you automatically succeed, or you automatically know that this is correct or incorrect. And then if there's an OCC out there, that occupation, that's not necessarily their thing, but maybe it's related, then I might give a bonus. Or then if they do have the skill and they're an occupation that's not related to it at all, that's when you roll. So that's kind of how I do the skill use. My skill list, here's my skill list. Elective skills, I kind of break them down into general and combat training and weapon proficiencies. Combat training are your forced march, your hand-to-hand combat, your mystic combat. Uh, Paired weapons was a weapon proficiency, but I have more of its own kind of thing, because it's not tied to specific weapons. Ranged combat, um, sniping, targeting, which come from later books. Targeting, I believe, is from the third book, Adventures of the High Sea, and I believe sniping comes from Yinslaw Jungles, and then thrown combat, which is a twist on juggling from Adventures of the High Sea. And when we get down to those, I'll explain why I have those and why I decided to do my 4 types of combat stances within melee combat. Or what Palladium would call melee combat, I just call combat. So then, weapon proficiencies, melee, ranged, and thrown are the 3 types there, and secondary skills. And all of these skills come from the main book, the Adventures of the High Seas, which was the third book, and the Innsloth Jungle, which is the 8th book. Those are the 3 books that had skills. And again, one of the purposes of this rewrite is people had the copy of this, and then they had a PDF that I took of the other skill list and put together. And they, if somebody's a ranger and they're looking in here to figure out what skills they have, and then they have this PDF with these other skills, it's like I got enough in here to look at, and that wasn't clear cut. You couldn't go to Ranger and see what skills were available to a Ranger. You'd have to read through every skill and see which one may or may not apply to you or give you a bonus. And the way that the bonuses were all over and things like that, it was just very difficult or more difficult than it should have been for my players to determine what skills were available to their characters. So consolidating all of those, as you saw yesterday, all the occupations have all the elective skills right there and all the secondary skills that they give bonuses to. And I did, if you look at this skill list and you look at other things, even if you just look at this book, you'll notice that I have combined a lot of skills together. This book here has trapping and skinning small animals, trapping and skinning large animals. The Ranger OCC is in here, but you do not get hunting as a skill until I believe Yinslaw Jungles, maybe the 8th book came out. And then what if what if you were playing back in 1983, and then all of a sudden say 10 years later, you get a new book that has these skills that would be essential to your character as a ranger, a hunting skill. So instead of just saying, okay, you have trap and skin large animals, small animals, hunting, here's 3 of your limited skills, because the skill number increased, but the skills that you could choose, the amount of skills you could choose did not. I just put them all together. So I have hunting. Hunting is trapping and skinning. It's hunting. It's all of that kind of wrapped into one. And I do that with a lot of these. A lot of wilderness survival was a bunch of even the like recognize animal tracks and plants and stuff, kind of just throw it all into wilderness survival. One of the interesting things is the philosophy of this book changed over time. You read this book and you read skills, and it specifically talks about not having skills that are based off of social aspects like bartering. And one of the things was this is meant the skills like that, then you roll and you don't actually have role playing going on. But then Yin Sloth Jungle comes around and there's a bartering skill because by that time a lot of people for different reasons, and depending on your table, depending on the people, depending on the system and the purpose, that can be valid. If my character knows something and I don't know it, why do I need to role play it? Because I would do badly. I would, my character would know these things, or it would be advantageous. So depending on where you're coming from, it might be good, it might be bad. So even the philosophy within this change, I allow it because just one of those things also, if you have, say, a thief who is very good at bartering and stuff like that, he does it. But if you have another player character that is a different occupation, that might not, say, a mercenary who's gruff in that and maybe not be very good but chose the bartering, then that can show that they are trying to do that instead of just having the character or the player who talks smooth take away that need for the mercenary fighter. So there's certain things like that that I did have to make my choice, and your table might need to make choices like that and might come up with a different answer that fits your table and the purpose of your game. But here's my kind of my condensed list of the elective skills and the secondary skills. The other thing, Palladium First Edition is the only one that has charts for all their skills. So, for example, here's some secondary skills, but you'll see that the skills will say like level 1, and that's the percent. And this is the base percent. Any modifiers might get added to that based off of your occupation. But one of the things, as you see, that was just a page of charts. Charts, look at all those charts, all the charts. And the descriptions are on a different page where all the descriptions. And I admit, in the very, very first session of my campaign, I just recently rewatched it to see if what I had forgotten, because I realized I do forget things. Um, and one of the players brought up when I was talking about the cooking skill. The cooking skill in Palladium, if we look here in Palladium Cooking, which is a secondary skill, it says this culinary skill is the ability to cook, bake, brew, etc. tasty dishes of food. The percentile number indicates relative skill and quality of the food. If the cook rolls above the success ratio, the preparations are particular disappointing, bland, too spicy, looks icky, etc. It doesn't make people sick. And one of the players was like, hey, wait a second. I had a changeling who was, his part in an army was a cook, and I rolled bad, and I gave the entire army diarrhea. And he had remembered that, and I had forgot until he had said that at that moment. And I'm like, yeah, I probably just didn't read the skill. I just looked to see what the percentile was, and as a game master, I didn't flip back to see it because they're in different places. So on part of my rewrite was reorganizing. So I get into certain opposing skills. That is also straight from here. Just another thing. If somebody's doing one skill and another person is countering it, how does that work? But here, elective skills, and you'll see like here, the first one, acrobatics. It describes what acrobatics does, and any bonuses that might be added to other skills because that's something that came in later. Those are listed, but then the base percentage for at every level is here, and that is different than later Palladium games. this is the first one that has charts. Everybody else is like, here is your base, and every level after gives you uh, this same percent is added, whether it's 2% per level or 4% per level. It will automatically just go up that many percentile points. In Palladium First Edition, these first ones like acrobatics would go up 4, and then it would go 4 4, but and it would go up 4 for a while, but then at the end it's only going up 2 points. So it some of them went up rather quickly at the beginning, and then at the end would lower. But those are basically the skills. One other thing I did is sometimes I moved an elective to a secondary, or a secondary skill to be an elective skill, and that was mainly based off of what other skills had been. An example is in this book, the lores. In the main book, all of the lores are secondary skills, and the lores that they have are um, demon devil lore, fairy lore. They even have plant and farm lore, which I think I wrapped up into probably wilderness survival or herbalism, combination of those. But those were the secondary skills here. Chart. And in Yinsloth Jungle, they introduced like witch lore and undead lore, maybe things like that, and they made them elective skills. And I took them as elective skills and moved them over to secondary skills. So all the lores were kind of together in the same skill category. And I just shuffled things around like that. If I notice a trend of certain things being in one place and then them getting moved over, or similar things getting moved to the other selection of things. So something you might not agree with, you might think demons, devils, and fairies are common knowledge, and witches and undead might be less common, and that's why you make them elective. That's fine. This is the reason I did it. Just know that things like that are out there, and you might need to make that choice on your own. So this is this that you can see over here. So it would be that way is the opposite from what I'm seeing, but over there, um, you can see what the percentiles are, how I put things. So, and it's just like this. Some need to have a little longer examples, and some have smaller. Um, I put skills that were in specific occupational character classes. I put them in the actual skill list, like the wizard. The skill list has all these skills, but not all the skills are in the skill list. If you go to wizard, that is where study circles is. That is where study symbol is. We look here. Explanation of the 4 magic electives: recognize runes, study circles, study symbols, study wards. All of that is there. And then other character classes will say, look at the wizard. And I just, again, I wanted everything in one place to make it easier for my players. So things like decipher circles, I put right there. Uh, Also, certain skills that a lot of mystical character classes had, I took those out of the magic combat charts, like, and just made them into skills that were available to those characters. Like here, you see for the warlock, they have like recognize enchantment, 36% that they gain at level 5, and then you go down and you're like, okay, at level 10, 56%. And then you go down, and that's it. So you have this 36% and you have this 56%. So I decided to take those that take that recognize enchantment, turn it into a skill that is available to any of these occupational character classes that have that type of thing and make it into one of these skills on like a normal skill, and then those slots would be freed up for something else to gain. Usually a save versus insanity was kind of my base go-to, but I did kind of that. Horsemanship can vary by occupational character class, but I do write what they mean. And then I break it down: general, knight, paladin, straight from this book. Hunting, again, that is a lot of tracking, trapping, etc. But a lot of these are just straight out of the books. We'll just go through those. Combat training, that is where I kind of start defining things for combat, like a plus damage. That is a bonus that you add to your damage die. What a parry is, a dodge is. Initiative, certain things in Palladium First Edition, they didn't start with initiative bonuses, but later on, a few things got initiative bonuses. So I did that. I have a distinction between actions per round and attacks per round. An action can be an attack, but if you do an attack, it's either going to be an attack or you're giving up that attack to move. And you can't do more than one in a round. And I will explain that just in a little bit when we get to the combat, the specific combat stance skills. I explain a critical on an X. Here, you start off, you get a critical on a 20, and then as you go in various combats, you will get critical hits on, say, a 19 or 20, or an 18 or 20, or 17 through 20. And they explain that nicely: double damage. And then they explain nicely that if you roll a 20, the only way that you can prevent that is to defend with a natural 20. But they don't say exactly what, or it's basically that you roll a 20, you're going to do double damage. If you roll a 20 to parry it, you don't take any damage. But it was unsatisfying to players who would roll that 20 to hit and say they had a bonus of, we'll say, +5. So they rolled a 25 total, a 20 natural 20 plus a 5. But the opponent rolled a natural 20 and they only had a +2. So their natural 20 completely canceled the attack, even though the total of their attack was greater than the total of the parry. And vice versa. If they're defending, they didn't like the idea of that person rolling or rolling a 20. And if I said, well, the 25 is better than a 22, they're like, well, I still rolled a 20. So what I decided to do is, if you have that, if the attacker is higher, but the defender rolled a 20, then it becomes a normal hit, not a critical hit. And but if the defenders with the bonuses was higher than the natural 20 of the attacker with the bonus, then it's just like a flat out normal parry. So that's something that I decided early on in the campaign, and it pretty much everybody understood it and kind of liked that. And even then, if they rolled a 20 and only had the +2, and the attacker rolled that 27, at least they know they're not getting critted. They'll get that normal hit, but not critted. So it works both for the enemies and the player characters, but it seems more fair. And that was one of the things that I did. While I was talking about occupations in the last video, I explained the automatic dodge, how I added that to Palladium. Critical strikes from behind, I explained that. I have criticals where they stack by ones. So if you have a critical here and a critical here, that ×2 becomes a ×3. If you add a critical from somewhere else, then it becomes ×4, etc. Death blow, I did change. Death blow here is you roll a 20 as an assassin and your opponent's dead. 5% chance your opponent's dead if they don't, I guess, roll a natural 20 to counter I liked the idea of instant death. I didn't like the idea of every single 20 a assassin rolls is an instant death. So that's where I was part of my shock points adding, instead of adding the hit points, your hit points are a base that may or may not get higher depending on your occupation. But if you say start off with a 10 and they roll a death blow, that is a crit directly to your hit points, and it really possibly could kill the character and be a death blow. But if nothing else, it's going to bypass those shock points and give and do damage to hit points, which is always wounds you and gives you a -2 to strike, parry, and dodge, just because you are hurt and your life is being threatened at that point. So that was my change of the death blow, is that it bypasses the shock points, very similar to later Palladium games where it bypasses SDC. So again, sometimes I look at those, even though I don't want to play Palladium Second Edition and I don't want to play Rifts, going for First Edition. Sometimes those rules make sense, and if I can incorporate those and make the game better for me, my group, my setting, my game, then I'll do so. So don't be afraid to poach from other Palladium books. If you want to be a purist, that's great. If that fits you and your table, I'm just saying that don't feel that it's necessary to make a good Palladium First Edition game. Um, and then we go into the hand-to-hand combats. One of the reasons that I love First Edition and I was disappointed in Second Edition, and I've stated this before, is the different martial characters had different attack styles. A mercenary fighter was different than a soldier, which was different than a thief, was different than a gladiator, etc. And I wanted to keep that. And Rifts and Robotech and BTS and all of those games, Palladium, later became hand to hand basic, hand to hand expert, hand to hand martial arts were the three. And then every once in a while, a game might add hand to hand assassin, or they might add hand to hand commando. And that was it. So all your basics were the same. All of your and everybody would spend, everybody that I know of would spend those extra skill slots to boost it up as high as they could. So everybody had martial arts, basically hand to hand martial arts. And when second edition came out, I was really, really excited. How were they going to take all the different men of arms styles and, add it in almost kind of their the ninjas and super size spies books actually did have hand to hands that were different for everything, and that's how I thought second edition was going to be. That it would have this list of every level you get this extra little thing, and each of the occupations would be different, very much like the different martial arts styles were in ninjas and super spies. And it wasn't. It was basic, expert, um, martial arts, and assassin, and that was a huge disappointment to me personally. To me, um, it's subjective. Other people might have been really happy to have that similarity to Riffs and BTS and Heroes Unlimited, etc. But for me, it was a disappointment. So keeping those in was one of the things that I kind of made sure. But certain things I did kind of move around. I gave, like, you see here the assassin at level 3. I think they might have gotten a kick attack or something, and I kind of moved that to that heavy kick type thing that we looked at yesterday. It originally, if we go to hand assassin, it was originally a kick attack doing a d6, but since my size dice are different, and a punch, if you're medium, a punch is a d6, I then just kind of removed that and added a +1 to initiative, something that I thought would be a little more interesting, instead of just a kick that everybody should be able to do. But otherwise, things are very similar to how they were. And again, I combined everything. So I brought in the gladiator, and the naturalist is that nomadic tribesman, and he kind of brought that over as well. And I think I took something and turned it into the hand-to-hand squire. So It looks like I even gave them a full thing. So then what did I do with the other stances and why? So this will probably be a quite large chunk of this video. But if you read this and you read how combat works, they only talk about melee combat. And then when you read how magic works, you get this magic chart. And you'll see at 4th level 2 spell attacks per melee. And they never define how that fits. Um, if you take non-men of arms, which is what the non-men of arms could take, basically they had all of these special ones for men of arms. But if you're a wizard, or if you're a warlock or a witch or mind mage, then you all got a general. If you took the hand to hand, you would get this non-men of arms. So the non-men at arms right there, that is what you would get. And it would give you some nice things. You could get up to 4 attacks. Men of arms got up to 5 attacks. So it would be good. But then when you read the magic combat, you see that it says 2 spell attacks. And then you need to decide, what does that mean? Does that mean I can do 1 normal attack and 1 spell attack? Does that mean I have to, within that round, only do 2 spell attacks and I can't switch off and do a hand-to-hand attack? Say I cast a spell and somebody gets in my face, can I stab them? Because you have like a 90% chance of failing once you're in combat with somebody and casting a spell. Or does that mean that you get your up to 4 attacks? Let's look here. Level 4 for non-men of arms probably is still 2 attacks. It's 2 attacks. But let's say you get to level 9. Level 9 non-men of arms gives you 3 attacks. Now, does that mean that you get 3 attacks and 2 of those could be magic attacks? Or you get 3 normal attacks? Or 2 magic attacks and you don't combine the 2? How does that work? No descriptions on that, how that works. And then when you look at various missile weapons, things get really confusing. If you look at these missile weapons, you'll notice that it has a S and an R, and the S means the plus the strike, and the R means the rate of fire. So a sling can get you up to 10 sling attacks. A short bow can get you up to 9 attacks. A crossbow can get you up to 7. And a longbow can do 9. And that is actually a rule that transfers in a weird way to 2nd edition Palladium. It transfers the Rift. If you look at weapon proficiency, like ancient weapon proficiency, archery, they give you a completely different number of attacks than your hand-to-hand skill. And your hand-to-hand skill is the number of attacks for shooting. So if you have 5 hand-to-hand attacks, you shoot 5 times, but as soon as I do an archer, I have something completely different. And then how does that work? Those 9s, that 8, 9, and 10, are literally double what your maximum hand-to-hand attacks are. Your hand-to-hand attacks on those hand-to-hand charts are 4 max for non-men of arms and 5 max for all the men of arms. What happens if I'm shooting with a bow and somebody gets in my face and I can't shoot with the bow anymore? Do I just lose everything? Do I, if I have 5 attacks and I've shot the bow 3 times, does that mean I get 2 sword attacks? I unsheath my sword maybe for 1 and then swing another. None of that is decided. None of it is explained in the book. And then if you look at the juggler skill, which is specific to the prestidigitators, that's where it explains how thrown are. It says at level 1 you can throw 3, like say knives, and X many at level X you get an additional one. At level the next level thing, you like, X plus 3, you get an additional one, so on, you get until you get a maximum throwing. And then it's like, well, how does that work? How do you switch weapons and go from shooting a bow to throwing a dagger to swinging in melee in the same round? Can you do it? Can't you do it? Casting spells, how does that affect? Um, Rifts and stuff later on said like spells take this many attacks, so it would take your attack, but then that would incentivize wizards to do the I'm getting as high of hand to hand, and if I have to switch to a different occupation to get a better hand to hand, then I'm going to do that so I have more attacks. If a low level spell is going to take 2 attacks, then I want to make sure I have as many attacks up there as I can have. So wrapping my head around this made me decide for my game to take those 4 different ways of attack and come up with 4 stances: a hand-to-hand stance which is melee, a ranged stance. I could have called it a bow stance, but slings are there. It's basically things where after you shoot a missile, you still have the main thing in your hand. So bows, crossbows, slings. If you're slinging a sling, you retain that sling. And then there's a thrown stance, which is that main thing you have thrown and it goes away. Knives, hatchets, you know, throwing axes, javelins, your sword. If you throw a sword, then that could be a thrown stance, and then magic stance. And what I do is your weapon proficiency. So your weapon proficiency, large sword, gives you a bonus to throw. And anytime you throw that, it could be a bonus. But you don't get your thrown combat stance bonus unless you're in your thrown stance. And since thrown weapons and ranged weapons, as I showed you, have a much higher number rate of fire, attacks, whatever you want to call that, that's where the attacks come in. If you're in a bow stance, a range stance, or a thrown stance, my philosophy on that is you are away from things and your total focus is getting as many shots as you can within that time without taking other things into account. So if you get into somebody, if somebody gets up in your face, you're either going to move or attack, and you can't do both. So your attack can be a move, it can be an attack, but you cannot dodge, you cannot parry, you can't do anything that would take an action because you are focused on doing that thing. Otherwise, you get double the ability of doing things that anybody else has. And that is for ranged and thrown stances. For my mystic stance and my hand to hand stance, those have actions. They are slower stances. It takes a long time to cast a spell, whether you're praying to your deity to be able to cast the spell, or you're a mage spouting off a formula, or however you cast your spells. That takes a long time because in Palladium First Edition, a round is a minute. It's not the 15 seconds as all other Palladium rule sets. But the hand to hand, it's not just swinging wildly. It's not the archer just going. It is gauging when that time to strike is, gauging that time when to parry, when to dodge, etc. are. So you're planning your strikes so you can do something else in that time besides just attack. You can move and attack at the same time because those are slow stances. So there's 2 slow stances and 2 fast stances. The fast ones being I'm away and all my concentration is getting as much stuff out as I can. Where the other ones are I'm being slow, I'm being deliberate, I'm casting that spell as perfectly as I can. I'm making sure that strike is at the moment where I have that opening to strike. But if you're in a hand to hand stance, you get those bonuses to hand to hand. If you're in a magic stance, you get your bonuses. You're preparing them magically, so that's when you get your bonuses to uh, save versus spells, save versus wards and circles and etc. You can do something from the other stance. So a wizard who gets confronted, he's a magic user, say he's cast one spell, he gets two actions in that stance. He gets confronted by a warrior in melee. Using these rules, he has like a 90% chance of the fail of the if he gets hit or he's in melee, 90% chance of spell failure. He probably doesn't want to cast a spell. He can try to stab with his, say he has a knife, he can, or hit with a staff, or stab with a sword, because there's no weapon limitations on what you can use. It's just what bonuses you can get. If he has weapon proficiency, let's give him a dagger. He has weapon proficiencies, knives and daggers. He gets to use those bonuses. He doesn't get to use his hand to hand non uh, non martial arts, or what's it called, I had it non combat, non men of arms. I think I call it general, because I just, there's lots of non men of arms that have it, like gladiators now, and as entertainers, and paladins as clergy. So I think I just call it hand to hand general. So he doesn't get to use the bonuses from hand to hand general because he's in the mystic stance, but he does get the weapon proficiency of knives because he can hit really well, and that applies to the other as well. If you are in hand to hand, then you don't get your mystical bonuses. You can't cast spells because mystic only allows you to cast spells, but mystics can downgrade to be able to do a normal attack. So basically, that's how I do at the beginning of the round. I have everybody choose the stance that they are in. That determines how many actions they have. Also, at the beginning of the round, that's when they get a free time to switch weapons. So if the ranger who's been shooting a bow all of a sudden is in melee, and they don't want to move away as an action, they decide to stay in melee, but they want to fight with something besides their bow, that's when they get the free change. Because one of the things I was trying to determine is, do I want it to count as an attack or action to draw a weapon? And in this, I decided, in after the round starts, after a new round starts, yes, I want it to count as an action. But at the beginning, while you're switching stances, even though it's not exactly realistic, I wanted a free option out there. So that's basically what I did. I separated combat. Each person individually decides their stance. That determines how many actions or attacks they get and what bonuses they get. Range, they're going to give you a plus to strike. They're going to give you your rate of fire. Same thing with the throne stances. Mystic stances, that's where you're going to get your bonuses to psychic attack, insanity, spells and prayers, circle and wards, based off of, as you're doing this magical energy, you're providing mystical wards and things out there as well. And then when you're in a hand to hand stance, you are firmly going to be in melee. It's not, I was in mystic stance and I'm surprised and I have to just quickly stab. You are in kind of the groove, if you will, on how you're going to be in hand to hand melee combat. So that's what I do there. Paired weapons is just, you can use two weapons, you can parry, you can attack, etc. I kind of explained that I didn't want it necessarily to be a paired weapon proficiency because it's not a specific weapon. I wanted weapon proficiency to be for specific things that could count in any type of uh, they could count in magic stances to use, etc. So that's kind of how I did that. Targeting, I allow for both mystical attacks as well as thrown and ranged. if you were casting a fireball at somebody, and here they had flat like dodges. You can dodge on say an 18 or better, and I thought with training the wizard should be able to do better because it just says a dodge of 18 or higher, and then you wonder, is that only a natural 18, 19, 20, a 15% chance, or do you get to add bonuses? And I decided I wanted to add bonuses and I wanted to allow things like auto dodge to apply. And then that led me to want to targeting to work for that. So you can get up to a +5 strike with that with the targeting at 13th level. Looking at this chart here, so that's a little extra that you can do. And when things are at the edge, we've had a lot of instances where there's area of effects, and people try to put it. You have some cloud of since like the sleep spell isn't just it's people fall asleep and it's done. It's actually a cloud that stays around. What happens when you have an opponent, uh, say a evil orc here, and you got your troll paladin here, and they're fighting, and somebody casts that edge while they're fighting. They're not just staying at the edge. Their arms are going through and stuff like that. So that's where I came up with also targeting can help. The targeting number the opponent has to get higher than, but the the ally gets lower than to not be affected by it. They can because they're kind of at the edge. So that's how I do those edge cases. Pun definitely intended. But all of these strikes parry throws for weapons are pretty much straight from the books. Um, Here is my throne. I decided to not quite go as far as having every single uh, rogue have its own throne and then a general throne for everybody else. But I do have general rogue, which is where assassins, thieves, etc. And then prestidigitator has the best because they're the ones who had that rule under them within juggling in the third book, Adventures of the High Seas. If we go where ranged is here, I broke ranges up into four. There is the general, there is archer, and that's where you could have your say your soldier or your mercenary fighter that instead of being melee combatants, they're still part of an army or a fighting force that are ranged, such as slings or archers or crossbowmen. So that's where ranged archer comes into play. And then ranger and longbow, because longbowmen, because I think then rangers were one of the two occupational character classes that were allowed to get the weapon proficiency longbow, so they should be better in ranged. And then the longbowman is like the pinnacle of ranged combat. So that's what those are the four that I broke up. So the mystic, I came up with the adept. That was one that I came up with, but other ones, clerics and priests, were always the same. So our shaman and priest were the same. So that's the cleric, priest, mind mage. All of those are brought in again. Insanity, I give those bonuses because um, that was something that I never actually thought of. All the decades of playing Palladium games, or at least knowing about Palladium games, it never occurred to me is when they added horror factor to BTS. I kind of like that. It's like, oh, here's a cool concept that makes sense. But they have this whole save versus insanity that never gets used whatsoever. They don't even like even in like coma and near death situations where you come out, they just say roll insanity. There's nowhere in the book that I can recall that there is a specific roll versus insanity against this. And I wanted things like horror factor to be there, but why add something when you already have this save in there? So that was one of the things that I did was I added some bonuses here and there versus insanity and use that as my horror factor instead of porting in horror factor from later Palladium games. And then secondary skills are kind of the same. Again, I condensed a lot. Witch lore, I call it beloved lore. I explained why I changed the name there. Um, just various things. Breeding dogs, falconry are in here. Here's the falconry. I do specifically have training breeding dogs be able to do other things. I think they even had it for like it could be used for others, but I wanted people that like the idea of maybe getting a griffin mount or a a bear mount or something like that. So I added those type of things to it. And falconry also could have a different griffin aspects in mythology. There's kind of two griffins, one that don't have wings and ones that do. So the ones that don't have wings would be part of that breeding dog, and the ones that do have wings would be kind of the falconry type thing. So I have that as well as horsemanship, depending can be used along with those. I kept fashion tools. I like the idea of being able to just slap something together. That's how you get your improvised tool to be able to do something that you normally wouldn't be able to do. You might not have the best tools, but that's kind of a quick fashion. Whereas a blacksmith might be more sturdy. Using blacksmith might give you those really good, exceptional tools. Um, but a lot of these general repair, all of this stuff is straight out of the book. So that is kind of it. So next part we will do equipment and weapons, armor, equipment, and how to make stuff. The rules that I did with that. So this is pretty much it for the skills. I just want to kind of explain that I kept the core of the skills. There were a lot of skills that I thought were redundant, where two or more skills kind of seemed to be part of that same thing, and I didn't want to have a huge list. So I consolidated things, I shift things around, I added the modifiers, I added the modifiers for stress, time, etc. So I will go ahead and stop that here. Thank you very much for watching. And once again, I'm Liam McCrafton Jr., aka Zorval Chan Less Than Guru. And until next time, I will catch you later.